So there's really no way to talk about this game or topic without getting into spoilers to a certain degree. So, warning, I'm going to be discussing spoilers for the first 2.5 hours or so, basically for the entire prologue of The Last of Us Part 2. If you haven't played it or haven't watched it, go click on something else, go watch it right now or start playing the game, and then come watch this and hear my discussion of it. I'm going to keep spoilers on everything after that to an absolute minimum. I'm going to try to avoid spoilers after that point completely, but consider this your spoiler warning for the first 2 hours or so of the game. So I have a lot of problems with The Last of Us Part 2, don't get me wrong. Chief among them is the fact that this statue, Ellie kind of looks like she's passing gas indefinitely. It's a little upsetting to me. But other than that, I would say Naughty Dog has an over-reliance on coincidence to justify actions and occurrences within the story of The Last of Us Part 2. And it's unfortunate because even the writers seem to have been aware of this reliance on coincidence, because they talk about it openly in the game by way of the characters who call out the unlikely circumstances of the things that are happening. And it makes me wonder, did they just not care that they were relying so much on coincidence, or did they make the active and conscious decision to have a lot of these actions and events that transpire in the prologue happen by way of coincidence? Did they just not care, or was it intentional and it was actually part of the creative process that they wanted this world to be one that just kind of tumbles out of existence in this weird way? I am not totally sure, but either way, I don't like it. Now let me get this out of the way straight. First and foremost, I'm going to be doing a full-length critique of The Last of Us Part 2. It'll be much more like a commentary that has a lot of critiques built within it, just like I did for the first game. I'm going to go through the entire game, start to finish. It'll probably be around 2 to 3 hours long. It's on its way, but it's a lot of work, so just sit tight and wait for that. I'm going to be going through the entire game, like I said, so I'll be critiquing the latter portions of the game and all of that stuff that does happen. So, you know, chill out. That's coming. This video is primarily about the reliance on coincidence and the fact that Naughty Dog's writers seem to have this double standard. Now, full disclosure, I really like The Last of Us Part 2. I think it's pretty remarkable what they pulled off, and I am blown away at how ballsy they were to do what they did. And again, we'll talk about all of that in the critique. I think I can argue my point and justify all of it, so I just ask for you to stay patient and hear me out on that. There are lots of problems with the game, don't get me wrong, but what they chose to do is pretty remarkable in my opinion. Because going back to the first Uncharted game, I always said Naughty Dog has this conniption, this proclivity to avoid following through on consequences of characters' actions across the board. If Nathan Drake does something stupid, he will find a magical way out of it. If Elena should have been killed off in Uncharted 2, she gets out of it because Naughty Dog doesn't want to have a sad ending. Or if they want a character to die off, they just introduce some minor character and then kill them off and act like you're supposed to be devastated or emotionally torn as a result of it. It doesn't work very well. I think they sort of played around with the idea of having major characters killed off or having consequences to characters' actions that are unbiased and don't care about a character's status within the player's mind hierarchy of how they feel about characters. In The Last of Us with, you know, killing off Tess in the original. And I thought that that was good, but even so, most of the major players and characters, you didn't really see a lot of crap happen to them until The Last of Us. And even then, they were characters that were introduced in that chapter usually, and then were killed off by the end of that chapter. So it's just not quite the same. Now in The Last of Us Part 2, they take this and flip it on its head, and they make sure that if a character does something that is worthy of punishment within this world, they will likely experience that punishment. What goes around comes around. It doesn't matter if you're the player character. It doesn't matter if you're a major character within the game's story. If you do some stupid stuff, you're going to get caught on it. It's just what's going to happen. It happens to NPCs, happens with the bad guys, happens with the good guys. What's fair is fair. And I personally love that. But I love that because the world makes sense in that instance. The world is justified in everything that it's doing and everything that happens within it. It doesn't have to explain itself. It's just a matter of what happened here and what followed it here. It's very simple, and I love that. Again, it's super kind of vague and non-descriptive right now because I don't want to go into the later sections of the game. Again, that's what the critique is for. Make sure to subscribe to be notified of when that comes out. We'll talk about it then, but if you've played the game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, the titular discussion today has to do with coincidence within the prologue of The Last of Us Part 2, and the fact that Naughty Dog relied on coincidence to set up the entire story. And I don't really know any other way to discuss it other than just getting into it. So let's walk through what I'm referring to. Elephant in the room. Abby wants to kill Joel because Joel killed her dad and ruined the Firefly's chance of developing a cure. What Joel did objectively, I think, is pretty terrible. He saved one person that he cared deeply about without consulting her or asking her what she wanted to do. He saved her for his own selfish reasons, even though it likely screwed over literally the entire human race. If that's not the act of a villain, I don't know what is. Just because he had developed a relationship with us and us with him while playing with him for hours and hours during the first game, that made us feel as though he was still the hero. What he was doing was noble because we played as him and we controlled him and were there with him the entire time. He should be the good guy, right? I'm not so sure. What he did was horrible. And that's most of what the second game talks about, is the fact that Joel wasn't really a hero except to these few select people, and even those people were well aware that Joel had done some pretty messed up stuff and didn't really deserve a hero's welcome at the end of the day, even though we all know him and love him even still. But that being said, Abby wants to kill Joel. So she gets her little groupies together and they all travel to Jackson. Now, they haven't seen Jackson. They don't know how many people live there. They don't know if it's a shack in the middle of a field or if it's a full-blown metropolis. But when they get there, they realize that it's a fully established city that is very well guarded and defended. And it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to find Joel in that city, first of all, without raising suspicion as to why they're looking for Joel. And also, it's unlikely they'll even be allowed into the city because a city that well established likely has very strict guidelines on who gets to come in, who is trusted, and who is not. Otherwise, they wouldn't have built themselves up to be a city because they wouldn't have had strict guidelines. They have rules and laws. That's what allowed them to get as far as they have. This is all expressed in one of the early scenes in the game when Abby and Owen go up to a little cliffside and overlook Jackson, seeing it for what it is. Owen tells Abby that everybody else in the group is going to want to turn around the second that they see this, and Abby realizes he's right. She knows damn well that everybody's going to want to turn around because there is no way in hell that they're going to be able to find Joel and enact revenge without getting killed themselves or just without getting noticed and then pushed out or killed before they can even get their foot literally within the door. And this is the thing. Naughty Dog knew that this is exactly what the player would be thinking if they saw this ragtag group of killers apparently show up at Jackson's front door and realize that this isn't going to be as simple as they thought. They'll likely be discouraged and want to just return home. After all, revenge against one person, one old dude, isn't really worth killing all 10 people or however many showed up at Jackson to try and enact revenge upon Joel. But Abby freaks out and decides to run and try to take matters into her own hands. And the reason she does this is because Naughty Dog knew that the only way they could justify Abby and Joel getting in the same room together so that she could enact her revenge upon him would be by way of coincidence. Because the only other solution would be to have some sort of more tactical solution to the problem. They could have had Abby and her group of people go in, try to infiltrate Jackson from the inside. They get welcomed in, they get a house, they start doing runs, and eventually they find out who Joel is. They assassinate him in the middle of the night, and then they race back to Jackson. What is this hair? What are you doing? I need a haircut real bad. It's that time. It's that time of the month. But a solution like that is a little less exciting than this slow and steady build in dread over the course of a 2-hour prologue. So instead, Naughty Dog decided that they were going to rely more on coincidence so that they could have all of this build up in the same day of the game. And don't get me wrong, it works. If I had to describe the first 3 hours of The Last of Us Part 2, I would say dreadful. Because you just have that feeling. I don't know if that's just because I had the game spoiled for me, so I saw everything coming, but I've heard from other people too that they also had this sense of dread and impending danger and doom. So I don't know. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it below. But how did Naughty Dog fix this? Well, they decided that, like I said, Abby was going to try to take matters into her own hands. So she starts just sprinting through the woods, because that's a solution. So you're controlling Abby. She runs through the woods and I guess is trying to run towards Jackson to do something. The writers knew that this didn't make any sense, which is why they have Abby throw out some lines such as, "What are you doing, Abby? Abby, this is stupid." Or, "This is so stupid." Like, they're well aware this doesn't make any sense, but nonetheless, they have the character do it. And I think that could be justified because she's come all this way. They've been traveling for weeks and weeks and weeks. It makes sense that she would be thinking, no, we've come this far, we're this close, we're not going to give up now, so I'll go do it myself. I can get that. Maybe that's justifiable. I'll give a pass on that one. But as she's running through, avoiding tons of hordes of zombies, which again, I'll allow that she would be able to overcome them and kill them because they've been stuck out in the snow. Zombies are likely moving slower than they would normally, as would any sort of living or unliving creature be. So she's able to overcome them. The thing I can't really forgive is that she just happens to stumble upon a trail from an expedition of patrol that happened to have gone by just recently, a couple hours before, that Owen witnessed before he brought Abby up to the lookout location. One more coincidence, maybe that could happen, I guess, if it's a main road, but still little bit of a coinkydink, so Abby decides to follow that trail. Abby follows that trail all the way up into this larger complex. She gets jumped by a ton of zombies. They all start coming down and attacking her in the middle of this blizzard. And right as she's about to be killed, a man reaches over, saves her, and it's Joel. Now, first of all, I don't need to explain how unlikely it is that Abby would just happen to land at the same place that Joel and Tommy are. How unlikely it is that Joel and Tommy would go outside when they were just inside to see all of these zombies attacking this strange woman that's been jumped by them. And also how unlikely it is that they would go put themselves in danger to pull the zombies off of her to save her when they don't know her. But even so, let's say that they were feeling generous, kind, and loving that day. Or maybe they even had ulterior motives and they were thinking, oh, this girl could help us escape out of this bad situation. It's just better for everybody. But even so, they grab Abby. They start running away. They get to a slight moment of respite to catch their breath. And Joel introduces himself as Joel. And Abby is kind of stunned by this because even she's thinking, holy crap, what are the odds of this? And that's my thing. Like, it really doesn't make any sense at all. Joel is an old man. He's fairly old at this point. In the first game, he was likely around 30 years old, although I'm not sure if it's ever clearly said, because his daughter happened to be around 9 years old, it seemed. So likely he's in his late 20s, early 30s in the first game. 20 years pass, that puts him late 40s, early 50s, and then this is 5 years after that, which puts him firmly in his 50s. He's an older gentleman. He probably shouldn't be going out on patrols in the middle of the night or early morning, when there are young whippersnappers such as Dina, Ellie, and Jesse who can do it just as well, if not better. Joel's brother is Tommy, and Tommy's wife is Maria. They both run the entire city themselves. If Joel were in that position, it's pretty unlikely that they would have him effectively on grunt duty, just running and doing patrols like one of the teenagers. It just doesn't make a lot of sense that Joel and Tommy would be out running these patrols when there's so many other willing, able, and capable people that could be doing it. But even so, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe Joel and Tommy are just the types of guys that like to be out in the wilderness, like to get their hands dirty, like to kill zombies. They want to do it, and they're going to do it no matter what social status would dictate. So I'll give them a pass there. But again, what are the odds that they would be running the route the exact morning that Abby was running the route? What are the odds that Abby would get jumped and forced into this exact location where Joel and Tommy are? What are the odds that Joel and Tommy would trust Abby enough to go back with her to Abby's mansion that they're staying at with all of her groupies without asking any questions? Again, the odds of this happening get smaller and smaller and smaller. And all of the characters, even in Abby's group, are well aware that this is unlikely, which is why the second that Joel says his name is Joel, everybody looks up and gets this weird look, like a bunch of lions looking at a wounded gazelle together. It's bizarre, but it's because they know what the hell are the odds of this happening. And that's what makes me think that almost Naughty Dog's reliance on coincidence in this opening sequence, they were like, okay, the odds of Abby finding Joel to begin with are very, very low. So let's just embrace the fact that it's a coincidence. Let's just embrace it, make it, justified across the whole thing that everything is based on a coincidence. And the fact that Abby was able to kill Joel just happened out of the randomness of the ether of the universe. And that almost frustrates Ellie more because it could have been avoided or should have been avoided. Or if Joel hadn't jumped on that patrol that day, it would have been avoided. All of which is true. It's just, I don't think it's as justified as having an intelligent, thoughtful justification for what's happening. I mean, all they really had to do was, like I said, have Abby try and infiltrate the group. They could have even had it so Abby builds a relationship with Ellie. Maybe even Ellie starts to kind of like Abby. And she's like, wow, this chick's pretty badass. We could get along. This is cool. She could be a new member of the friend group. This is awesome. Abby's pretty cool. That's awesome. And then maybe Abby also starts to build rapport with other people in the community until one night, Abby attacks Joel, demolishes his head until it turns into some sort of blood chili, and then runs off, and then the rest of the game plays out the exact same way that it did before. I think that could have been even more interesting if you had that relationship built between the antagonist and protagonist, and then had the crux of everything that went down occur. I think that would have been very, very interesting. Unlikely, even still, yes, that Abby would just show up at the front gate, would be trusted, that the player would start to like her, and it would probably take a couple hours in order to start to feel as though she could be trusted or liked. But still, I think it could be interesting. Let me know if you think that intro would have been better in the comment section below. I'm interested to hear. The point of this whole video is just to point out that Naughty Dog was very reliant on coincidence in this story. Sorry if there's a cat tail in front of the camera throughout the next couple minutes. Finley, my cat, is walking around. He's a bit of a drama queen. Now, I don't think that coincidence is inherently bad, and I'm going to talk a lot about that in the full-length critique. Again, subscribe. Whether we like it or not, coincidences do happen in the real world. They're not completely unrealistic because they do happen by definition. So my problem with coincidences in stories isn't that they're unrealistic, because in many ways they are. My problem is that it usually is indicative of the fact that the writer knew where they wanted to take the story. They knew what they wanted it to be, and they just had to jerk the track into shape in order to make it fit, which rarely means that the characters were treated appropriately or realistically at that. But who knows, maybe I'm just overreacting and all of this coincidence reliance is just not that important. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, especially if you've played the game. And make sure, again, to subscribe down below if you want to see the full-length commentary on the game. It's taken weeks to prepare, and it's going to take a few more weeks to prepare and set up. So just bear with me because it's going to take a hot minute to finish. But I think it's going to be pretty kick-ass once we're all done with it. Also, follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Links in the description box below. I'm going to be tweeting out a survey. It's going to be around 20 to 30 questions. It's going to be used for a bunch of statistical analysis on gamers and their opinions and interpretations of The Last of Us Part 2. And it'll be used in the critique and commentary when that eventually comes out. So if you want to be a part of the next critique, go and follow me there so you get notified when those get published. But that's it from me. Thank you for watching this episode of NitGrit. You guys are awesome. I love you dearly. Again, comment below. I want to hear your thoughts. I love you. Kisses, hugs, whatever people say when they love something. Bye.